Son of Beast deserves to have a return at Kings Island because its most iconic feature, in my opinion, was a total success. Back in the 80s, but mostly the 90s, there seemed to have been a drive to try to get the tallest wooden coaster. From Intamin to Din Corporation, and to ultimately the Roller Coaster Corporation of America. The record for the tallest wooden coaster went from park to park, finally landing with the victor of this record at Kings Island, then Paramount's Kings Island. Still, the tallest and fastest wooden coaster to have ever been built, Son of Beast hosted arguably the most ambitious project for a regional theme park ever. But despite achieving these high marks of value, it was a vertical loop that made Son of Beast truly become an icon, at least initially. I personally loved Son of Beast, and up until 2005, when I decided I only wanted to ride Son of Beast once per year, it was my favorite roller coaster. No other coaster that I'd ridden truly made me scared like this one. Being so high in the air, supported by just wood, and going down a rather shallow drop, but into a crazy head chopper, and of course, knowing how rough it would be at the bottom of the drops. All that fear and the anticipation and pain added up to an exhilarating experience that received incredible payoff when you finally got to glide into that giant, forceful loop. And that's what I mean when I say its most iconic feature was a success, the loop. I believe if Kings Island would have scrapped the Rose Bowl for a straight out and back layout, or made a wider single swoop in that area, or even my personal favorite choice to just invest in a slightly smaller loop, I believe we would still have a Son of Beast today. But that's just my own make-believe. So, I digress. The tragic accident of 2006 is a chilling story that unfortunately resulted in many, many people injured, but at least different from most park accidents. At least this was one where the ride operators were actually sort of the heroes for being observant enough to stop the ride from letting yet another train go through once people finally were hurt enough to be visibly hurt. It was caused by many variables through construction shortcuts, from lowballing the price to heavy trains and possibly bad design or even bad maintenance. No offense to anyone in particular, but in the 2000s, as I remember it, Kings Island Woodies were pretty rough by today's standards, at least. And all of them. All of them. It was just the standard. Ultimately, the heavy trains were what would receive the most direct fix following the 2006 accident, as the point of failure where the ledger actually cracked and caused the track to fall down. It seemed to have just been fixed and put back to how it was before. At least I couldn't tell a difference if it wasn't. So the heavy trains were replaced with lighter trains, and due to the new weight of the trains, it was decided to remove the loop. The true death sentence for the ride, in my opinion. Turns out the lighter trains wouldn't have been able to complete the loop, which to me makes sense because every time I rode, visually it looked like we weren't high enough to complete the loop when exiting the mid-course brake run. I did ride Son of Beast after the loop was removed, and the roughness felt virtually just as I remembered, but it was no longer worth it. No first drop head chopper, no awe from the surreal loop, no moment of smoothness. Yes, the loop was very smooth, and that's why I always say the loop was the most successful part. Despite this, if I'm right, over the years you'd hear people say yeah, we don't go upside down on Woodies. That didn't work so well last time. Or they'd say, if you want to know why we don't go upside down on Woodies, just look at Son of Beast. But then, when Woodies started to go upside down again, you started to hear, yeah, well, there's a reason these aren't vertical loops. So maybe I'm paraphrasing too liberally, but these are the kind of statements I'd always hear. But the loop was not only the greatest part of the ride, but the most successful, as I just said. A genuine wooden track with a perfectly engineered steel spine. I would have loved to see track replacement happen on this thing during maintenance, just to see how they did that thing upside down. But I suppose it'd be similar to how the Gravity Group Woodies get maintained. But they have rolls and corkscrews so far, so in my opinion, yeah, it's a little different. But, by the way, I think the Gravity Group ones are the only true inverting Woodies, because things like Outlaw Run, I think most people have accepted that they're wooden coasters, but it's still the ratio from steel to wood on the rails. it's pretty drastically different. So at least in the traditional sense, they're the only inverting woodies from traditional construction methods, at least from a glance. But anyways, I just needed to get these thoughts off my chest finally. And as much as I've enjoyed many real YouTubers' thoughts and documentaries on the ride, I felt I should say at least some of my thoughts on it. And mine are at least partially positive, as a resilient young kid at least. And fewer people online would have ridden the coaster and are still actively online. So I felt I owed it to myself to counter the absolute negative view for the ride. For the time, it was very rough, but during that time also, every aged woody was at least a little bit rough, at least in my experience, so it was bad but forgivable, given the incredible height, the speed, and of course the payoff of the 118-foot vertical loop. But I don't know, what do you think? Did you get to ride the Son of Beast? Were you young, fully grown? I'd love to hear more accounts from people to get a more realistic picture of the experience, because most of the people I rode with either vaguely remember or they were young like me, so they didn't really mind the admittedly rough ride because you'd feel perfectly fine again by the time you walked past the photo booth. Oh yeah, the photo spot. Why did they put that thing at the bottom of the lift hill? I always thought the perfect spot would have been the top of the drop right before you're about to drop down into the loop. Like the view was like mesmerizing, and the realization that you were about to go into such a gargantuan element, I think it would have brought awestruck faces or terrified faces for at least most riders. Anyways, that's all for now. If I end up making another video, I think maybe I'd make a testimonial for Tomb Raider The Ride! Or maybe a non-KI park. Anyways, peace out.